remarks. A couple of things. One is I really would like to see pedestrian and bicycle access as soon as possible. We don't want to do that foolishly, as we know there are still some work to be done with regard to rules for access, stuff you can and can't do, as well as just making sure we bud this down as a safety matter. But we're working on that as we speak, and we'll try to get those issues resolved as soon as possible. The other thing is Kate and I actually have a discussion today, I think Monica will be on there as well, with a firm that specializes in assisting towns with these large municipal developments. So it's not just kind of construction and landscaping and all of that, but it's the visioning, and it's town and community engagement, and it's strategizing about kind of what to do. When I heard them speak, it's not to say that we would hire this firm, we'll talk to multiple firms, but when I heard this particular firm speak at the Dairy and Men's Association last, I guess late October, fantastic. They really know what they're doing. They've been doing it for years and years. They have been exposed to every conceivable problem. They know how to get the community on board. They know how to filter input to where it gets to a decision and a cohesive strategy, and then they're really good at helping on the execution side of that. So just like any building committee we would have, having professionals, whether it's a contractor, an architect, or someone who can just help us strategize and facilitate community engagement, is going to make an enormous difference. So I'm looking forward to that. Now that the traffic circle issue has been resolved, that we're going to do all that stuff now with alacrity, word of the day. Other things, I know the HHR building committee is meeting tonight. Jill, I guess you'll touch on that in your comments. That's going to be a pretty important topic, lots of moving parts with that, big numbers, and I think all of that needs pretty careful scrutiny, so I look forward to hearing your comments on that, and I will be dialing into that meeting tonight to hear it all firsthand myself. The budget process is well underway. I think Kate's got all of the department head budgets that you're working on, and right after we get back from New Year's, that process is going to kick off. I agree with the guidance that Jim provided from the Board of Finance and his RTM comments, and I think that'll provide a good sandbox for us to all play in. I know we're facing a lot of inflation driven by a number of factors, but certainly on the town side, we'll strive to meet those guidelines and communicate as soon as possible if it looks like we can. So that's that. And then finally, I am excited about the video program that I've developed about trying to explain things, and as soon as the holidays get through, I'll have a plan to launch off into that, and I've got hot topics that I will be addressing with that in a way that I hope is helpful. So anyway, looking forward to the holidays. Hope everybody has a great break and all that stuff, and I'll wrap it up when we're finished. But that's it for me. Jill.
Okay. This is a fun time of year for the schools. I've myself been to several band and choir concerts to kick off the month of December, and we have a big one on the 19th, the holiday concert that I mentioned on Monday as well.
When and where is that?
The 19th at the high school, probably about 7, but I will confirm the time for you.
Great.
Okay. Friday morning, I went to a breakfast at CES Cooperative Educational Services, which is a group that does some, they have a couple different educational things that they do. There's a magnet school, for example, but we often use them for placement of certain children with who need special services. They host an annual breakfast in December with legislatures, members of boards of education, and superintendents. It was what I called last night, a robust discussion this year. It started off with teacher shortages. Again, all of our, I mentioned that it's a nationwide phenomenon, but certainly everyone in Connecticut is very concerned about it, and there was lots of discussion about what is being done and what could be done to redress it. I think the two things that seem to be particularly pertinent to teachers entering the field, which is where we're having difficulties. We have accelerated retirements and then people not entering the field. One is the cost of just getting an education, and the second is the ability to work while you're getting an education, because for teachers to graduate with that amount of school in debt at the starting cost of teachers is extremely complex. We have in Darien adjusted our teacher contract and attempted to make our entering salary much more competitive, in part to answer that, but it's an uphill climb, and it's something that would need to be done across the state and nationwide to attract more people. So we're hoping that the state will take a look at both of those two drivers. One, the need to work while you're getting your education, and secondly, the cost of education. The other thing that came up at the CES breakfast is how the state works with school districts in terms of funding, timeline, and the role of the state. Whether we're talking about the change to kindergarten legislation, which moves the date from January 1st to September 1st, and went into place immediately, starting this coming fall. Whether we're talking about the reading waivers, where the state went through and reviewed all of our reading programs and decided whether or not they were compliant with the state's own goals about reading, or whether or not we're talking about the legislation that extends the age that schools service students with particularly strong needs up to age 20 or through the age of 22 until their 23rd birthday. Each of those was put into place fairly quickly. Districts were expected to respond quickly, and there are no dollars following those mandates. You'll hear us talking robustly about the reading waiver. Darien was granted a partial waiver, not a full waiver. So there are components of our reading program that we'll be looking at. We're certainly happy to look at it as an opportunity. We're always in the process of adjusting how we teach students, and we're always willing to look for improvements. There are areas where what the state has identified aligns with areas we were already planning to look at. But there are other areas that we're asked to look at that were outside of our original plans. In contrast, the play-based learning that we're going to be implementing over the next couple of years was rolled out in a way that's sensitive to school timelines. And so while the legislature doesn't do it 100% with disregard to the schools, it's a longer-term conversation we need to be having. Again, funding timeline and where the state should be inserting, what degree of specificity the state should be inserting into our school processes. We just had our facilities tour on Saturday morning. Thank you to all of those who came. You all may be aware, of course, you all are aware, that we changed that from March to December. We're very pleased with how it turned out. We liked looking at it earlier before our budget as opposed to after our budget, but before we turn it over to the RTM. After the facilities tour, I, and not the only one, drove over to the football state championships. While the end result was not what Darien had hoped, it was a wonderful game, and we're certainly thrilled for the team that they were there. It was exciting to be up in Hartford in that stadium watching our kids play. The deficit, we are, as you know, running a deficit. It's just a little north of $600,000. We'll have an update on that in our Finance Committee meeting later this month. There's been some wiggles in it. It started out a little higher. It's come down a little bit. The main driver of that is special education. We're experiencing, like everyone, a lot of volatility in that category. One of the reasons for it is the legislation I mentioned earlier, extending the age that we serve students through 22. We've also had some changes in placements and how we deliver services, as well as some increased costs in the category. We often return special education dollars. We have pretty much steadily for the past 10 years. So some volatility in the category is not surprising and to be expected, and we may see it on an increasing basis. Across the state, we are seeing increases in identification rates to closer to 17 to 20%, whereas state funding is currently has increased only about 11 to 14%, whereas before that, for many years, it was flat. So again, another area where we're looking at our relationship to the state, kind of as you mentioned Monday night, the importance of being in conversation with legislatures. That category continues to be important, but also significant for school districts. We are looking at the possibility of coming to you all for a security appropriation. We talked last night in exec session about the components of it. It is the recommendation of our finance director that it be handled via a separate appropriation, simply because putting it in the budget books, the way that those work and the requirements, he's asking that, of identifying what happened, he's asking that we do that via an appropriation.
What's the timing?
The timing of that would be probably February, March. We are looking at whether or not that can be tied to coming to you guys with the the deficit appropriation. At the same time, it is not a special education deficit, is it? But anyway, we're looking at the timing, whether it's February, March, and whether or not those two things can be tied, or whether or not we should come to you separately. if we do the security appropriation this year, then we can begin the work in the spring and continue it through the summer. During the facilities tour, we did identify a broken air conditioner in the server room at Tokenique. It's about an $18,000 project. It's in our capital plan. Because it is broken and because they've turned off the heater in the room next door and are just trying to keep the servers alive, we're going to probably recommend a transfer inside of our own budget to go ahead and get that fixed over February break, and we'll include that as part of the narrative when we come back to you for an appropriation on the deficit, unless anybody feels strongly that we should wait any longer.
I don't think you wait on servers.
No.
No, I'm going to say.
No, indeed. We're getting ready to kick off our budget process, like you guys. As you all know, we've made some changes to the process. The board is focused a lot on making sure that we develop strong goals and objectives for the year back in the spring, and those will be carried through into our budget process. And we're taking a look at how we've run through the actual financial piece. We started out with a presentation on our core expenses and what that looks like. As you know, we are looking at high core expenses in a period of teacher and administrative shortages and turnover. We understand why, but we certainly are aware of the difficulty that presents. But anyway, we look forward to being in conversation, particularly Seth with you guys on the RTM and Jim with you all on the Board of Finance, as we refine also how we interact with your bodies. We're wanting to make sure that the board process is done with fidelity on the Board of Education side, and that the load on our administrators is appropriate. There have been a lot of wonderful questions, but we were just porting them directly to administrative staff, and we need to make sure that we're not just sending everything along, that it's appropriately managed by our own board.
The thing that makes things run smoothly through the RTM and in the RTM is openness and dialogue. Mm-hmm. And I think the circle, the primary example of that, went through why? Because all the questions were answered.
Yes.
I'm not sure that we care how they're answered, just as long as they get
answered. They are answered. Fair enough. Fair enough. I'll switch from Board of Ed to HHR. As you know, we did go out for our second bid. We were pleased that we had increased participation. We did see some costs go down. We were disappointed that we did see escalation in some of our other line items. So we're finding that while we did save some dollars, at the end of the day, we are still talking about the possibility of a $19 million appropriation. The committee will be having that conversation tonight, taking another look at the final numbers and what that would mean, and having a brief conversation on what that would mean and whether or not this is the right thing to do. That will be tonight at 6 o'clock. We are looking forward to that. Anyway, that's my story.
Okay. Jill, just a couple of questions on things that you mentioned, and one is maybe just sort of kind of language and clarification. I think when we talk about our operating budgets, I think it's important, on the school, there is no deficit. There is no shortage of dollars to provide all the services that we need to on the school. What there is as of December 13th, so there's a projected possible shortfall or overage in the budget of $500,000. So I just want to make sure the public knows that there's not a shortfall or deficit. There are no services. It's not like you don't have cash. You have 7 more months worth of budget. So I think, so I think it's important to talk about it. It's important to talk about it in terms of looking 7 months out. There's a projected. We may be projected to be over a budget, but there's not a deficit today because, as we saw last year, I think at one point there was $1.8 million surplus. And then that swung to an $800,000 surplus. So throughout the year, there's a lot of movement in all of our operating budgets. So I think it's important for the town to know there is money there. And I think as you get closer to the end of your fiscal year, since you can't have a budget shortfall on the last day of the fiscal year,
right,
we're certainly here to support you guys, as we sort of understand more about that. Look forward on the security appropriation, look forward to kind of understanding why there's a recommendation of a special appropriation ahead of that, if it's going to be done next year, but we'll kind of learn more about that. One thing on the facilities tour I noticed, I was there for most of it, although I had to sneak out for a football game, but talking to a few of the members on my board, as you think about that event going forward, something to consider would be, it would be good to get it sort of a holistic overview of some of the facilities, because I think while it's good to see like an air conditioner and a piece of blacktop and some carpeting and so forth, it might be good, sort of like we do with the fire department or even the Parks and Rec does, where every few years they do a holistic tour. So we really get a sense for kind of what the condition of all the facilities are, and then...
You mentioned that to me, actually,
Yeah.
and Dennis reported into the board last night in his facilities
Great.
review that they will talk about the possibility of doing something more holistic at their next facilities meeting. Thank you for the thought.
Got it. Okay.
I would also just like to, if you get someone from P&Z invited, that'd be great.
Okay.
It doesn't
That's a good
necessarily
point.
be me, but,
Yeah.
we're the one that look at all the stuff when it needs to get fixed.
Yeah.
And given, the 8 or 9 different facilities, I guess if you consider Fitch, they don't all need to be every year, but you could do maybe a couple per year, just so we all really get a feel for
Sure. Sure.
what's happening with our infrastructure. That's it.
Nothing on your end?
So on the Board of Finance side, maybe I'll just hit on a few things from the state of the town. One of the areas where I discussed a lot was the recent grand list valuation. Generally, if you look at real estate, which includes residential properties and sort of vacant lots that are reappraised every 5 years, we saw it go up by about 29%. And John's, video number 1 did a great job of sort of talking about how that can affect different taxpayers. I tried to take a little bit of what John did and drill down a little bit further to begin to look at as we head into this budget season, whether there is a reallocation of the tax base within the different quartiles, quintiles, and so forth within the 6,800 properties, generally speaking, that we have in town there. And we broke them up into 13, to 5 different groups of 1,365. And generally what we found is, if you recall from that presentation, was there's a lot of consistency between those 5 different groups. They all went up or down as a whole by plus or minus 1% of the overall town. So whereas the town was 29%, those different groups were up between 28 and 31%. So it's a relatively tight band when you go from the aggregate down to the quintiles. But that's one of the things I mentioned there. If the further you dig down and you look at the variance in standard deviations within each of those quintiles, there's some significant swings where certain properties were up by 40, 50, 60%, and certain properties were actually down a bit. So as we think about allocating taxes and ultimately setting that mill rate and so forth, there's going to be some other forces at play. So I think we really need to make sure that our budgets, we're looking at them very closely, and I think communicating very clearly with the public, because there will be a lot of new numbers showing up in people's.
The hard part is the average, The average goes up, but within the average are as you point out, the swings, differences depending upon the property and whatever. It's trying to explain this is not easy. I thought you did the best you could do,
In terms of other things, we have a meeting on Tuesday next week, so you haven't set the agenda there, but we'll take our cadence from what Board of Selectmen is, puts on theirs next week and so forth. And then, just big things as we move into next year, we do expect to go to market sometime in March, if not early April, to refinance some of the short-term debt we put in place to finance the island and pre-finance some of the HHRs. So we'll be looking for favorable market conditions there. I think we've certainly seen a big improvement in rates over the past 90 days. Slight rebound in the past week or two, but generally there's a downward trend, and it looks like if you follow the Fed dots with where you think short-term rates and medium-term rates are going to be going, we should be in a good spot there to, I guess, once again, either be lucky or smart or both.
We'll take both, thank you.
Yeah. So that's it from the Board of Finance side.
Something like a little luck.
Oh, I guess maybe just one thing, talking about the operating budgets. I think what I'm going to do, and I've spoken to my board about and so forth, I think this year, again, we're going to be a little bit more in listen-only mode as each of your staff heads, both Kate and Alan, sort of deliver their preliminary budgets to you. So I think our plan is to be a little bit more in listen-only mode, hear how you guys begin to work with your staff and develop that into the budgets that you all adopt and put forward to us. And, kind of rather than, submitting 100 questions when the thing first pops off the copy machine, I think we're going to wait a little bit and see kind of how you guys discuss and hear your priorities and kind of give you feedback a little bit more towards the back end of yours when you've had a chance to sort of look at that.
Yeah. One thing I mentioned, and we and I talked before Monday, and then I mentioned in my State of the Town, was just this concern that I know a couple of people have articulated about just our debt load going from what it was before to adding on a lot of debt for Great Island, Oxbridge, and now HHR when we get around to spending that money. And I know you guys are going to take a look at that. Do you have any sort of preliminary messages for folks in terms of just how to think about it and kind of what are your concerns or issues with that debt load and how it translates into debt service and tax implications?
Yeah. So I kind of break it into two different pieces. There's how much debt do we have and what does it cost us, and will that be crowding out other important operating costs? And then I look at how much debt do we have and are we in a good position to be able to raise additional debt for things that we expect, additional schools, or things that we don't expect, right? And on the first point, I would say, in totality over the last 12 months, our aggregate debt load went from 84 million to 184 million. And that's, obviously a substantial increase. We've never really had debt above $100 million. But when I look at debt service, what we actually pay in debt service and what that is as a percentage of our overall town budget, historically, it's been in the sort of 5 to 6% range. And the expectation is that fully loaded for Great Island, for Oxbridge, for what we're expecting for HHR and some other ongoing projects that we know we're going to have over the next couple of years. With the increased debt load, which will certainly go above 200 million, we'll see the debt service as a percent of the whole budget float from 5 to 6% up to maybe a high, depending on rates, of 7 to 8%. But it's still going to be significantly below a lot of our peers, significantly below where the rating agencies would have concern and so forth. And I would say, a movement from 5 to 6 to 7 to 8, that doesn't necessarily concern me that our debt load is going to be crowding out, if you will, operating expenses, okay, which are 95%, 94% of our overall spending. And on their ability to finance, the next projects, whether they be, sort of higher than expected costs of current projects underway or new stuff that's coming, we're well underneath our statutory debt limit in terms of what the state would actually allow us, legally under the state statutes to be able to issue. And from a rating agency standpoint, if you talk about sort of maintaining our AAA rating, which means we really have access to the lowest cost of funding available in the state, I think we have plenty of room there. Not that we want to use it all, but I think we have ample room. So
it is a bellwether, that's if you're getting into territory you didn't want to be in, it'd be if the rating agency started to say something. It shows you the strength, the financial strength of this town is incredible.
Correct. But if you really begin to take it to the extremes and you ever say, well, what would happen if we move to a AA rating versus a AAA? If you look at the incremental pricing, like the compression between AA and AAA spreads and so forth, it's not material relative to our overall debt service costs and so forth. And when you begin to look at sort of variability and rates that bouncing around on a week-to-week basis and so forth.
Do you know what the average spread is between AAA and sort of the next rating?
Well, depending on where you are in the curve, whether it's very long-term debt or shorter-term debt, it can range from 10 basis points to 30 basis points.
So in the scheme of sort of long-term debt service, is practically nothing.
Well, correct. And there's not just, we talk about AAA and AA. There's really AAA, and then there's AA1, AA2, AA3. So those are all these sort of things. But I think, and based on our review with the rating agencies last year, I think we're in good shape. And we have a great graph which we're going to update, which will show the community how we've been able to layer on our debt by changing the profile a bit to minimize the effect on the overall budget.
Yeah, you might actually even consider doing that for, the median house, right?
Yep.
Because sometimes curves are one thing, but to actually say, okay, if you're a homeowner and this is your median home,
Yep.
this is what your taxes look like today, and then we're going to throw in a few scenarios so you can see what that looks like over time. I think that'll help people get grounded in terms of what this means for me.
Yeah. We could, we kind of put together the 5-year model when we looked at Great Island, so we could move in Oxbridge, HHR, and Great Island, and a few other things to kind of look at pro forma over the next 5 years, what the changing mill rate effect would be. And so we can refresh that with some of the updated timing and the actual rates that we had.
Good.
Jim and John, while this is really more about the impact to the household, just in terms of long-term planning, middle school will be behind HHR. We talked about it in our last facilities and second to last board meeting, that the roof is coming up, air conditioning is coming up, and so whether that ends up being discrete projects that are done under our capital plan or whether it ends up being a building committee, the timing for that is probably 27 to 29.
That building's like 20 years old now, right? Because they built it after I got in town. I've been in town 23 years.
It was renovated in the late 90s.
Which was, I got here in 1999,
Yeah.
and it was still the old, it went up way up the street. That's when they knocked down all
Yeah,
that
the
stuff.
building itself has been there for a long time.
Right, but the extension and the
Yeah,
time and all
90s.
that.
And
Yeah.
they redid the roof when they did that renovation.
I don't know, that I was not here at the time.
Okay.
Yeah, that was 2000s or something like that, when they added that wing out. I've got a quick question for you, and I think I already know the answer, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Is any high interest rate debt dropping off, or did you already refinance that years ago? Because, I think we last talked that your most recent debt amount is, in the high ones, low twos. Is there any 5% interest rate debt still out there on our books?
So two things there. We've scooped up most of our higher coupon debt that actually is callable today. Previously, so that as of now, we'll look at it sort of each year. But there's and as rates come, if rates continue to come down, if there are other opportunities. But about 6-7 years ago, the tax law changed a bit, where you can no longer advance refund maturities. You can only current refund maturities. So it's a composition of our callable debt or non-callable debt. Long story is, we don't really have any near-term material savings, refinancing opportunities. But what we do when we go to a market in March or April, we always look at and see if we can tack on, because the incremental costs of adding a little bit more bonding is relatively low. But the big takeaway is the change in the tax law took away our ability to really sort of advance refund longer term.
So the interest rate on the $184 million is basically level. There's not any, 1.5% debt and then 6% debt or something like that.
Yeah, most of the coupons are in the sort of 4 to 5% range, but the ones that we have right now that are in that range aren't callable, and you can't refinance them ahead of time.
Got it. Okay.
Other questions for Jim? Okay, Steve, all yours.
Yeah, thank you. I enjoyed it, like I said earlier, the State of the Town address. That's always a fun night for me. And I love hearing all you guys speak to what's going on. In our last meeting for P&Z, we basically closed out most applications that we were working on, so there's not a lot of carryover into 2024. We do have to express or speed up certain applications that want to. One is like the Weed Beach Path project. They want to get us to get that done quickly, because then they want to go out and bid it and get, go to the RTM where they're going to get the money from, so they can get it approved and opened by the spring. We also looked at, just as an example, Methodist preschool. They want to add a classroom, and I'll touch on that again in a second. They want us to express that too, so they can add in there another classroom of 14 more kids, so they can get that open in the fall and do construction over the summer. because they need to bid out all the contracts, is what everybody really talks about. And part of just touching on, again, for a second, is I know you guys know most of the stuff on the Board of Ed side. This whole new changing of the
Kindergarten age.
of the starting school earlier. I mean, I don't know if it's 4 to 3 or 3 to 2.
Oh, the late start?
You know, the age of the children.
The age of entry into kindergarten,
Right.
moving that from January 1st to September 1st, yes, is causing, our early childhood education groups are going to need to expand. So I'm not surprised to hear that Methodist is in front of you. And this is one of the costs that the state is just assuming communities are going to take on.
Right, and the thing I want to add to what your thought process, and it's not a lot, but like Methodist is adding 14 seats for 3-year-old kids, I think. The Goddard School is going to come on in a couple of years. That's 150 seats. So when you're planning on adding more
Okay.
seats or units or whatnot, we almost had that Montessori school come in town. That guy was like 78 kids or something like that. They landed up withdrawing the application so that I can be there, but
Okay.
you may see more of that stuff pop up. We also expanded, based on state law, we changed in-home childcare. So now, instead of having a special permit for in-home childcare, it's also as of right. So you might see some people doing,
Okay.
5 kids in somebody's house. That all has to get permitted by the state, but that's someplace we're going to put kids versus in other spots versus inside homeschool or Hindu school or
Yes.
Is
ELP.
this change to the school age starting, does that create a sort of long-term increase in the demand, or is this a one-time possible change for the 40 or 50 kids that could be affected?
I'm just talking about supply.
For the elementary
Yeah.
schools, it will stabilize. But for the early childhood schools, it means that they educate up through a later age than they were before.
Maybe by later age. earlier.
So if kids were entering, that cohort in Darien is about 30 kids. So, in Darien, a lot of our kids were already going to preschool or to pre-K equivalents. But there were some who definitely entered kindergarten at, in September at 4. So those kids will now need to be educated in the community, in our preschools or in our school through our ELP.
Parents could choose not to.
Send them to kindergarten?
No, not
Or
send them to
anywhere.
preschool, yeah.
Or parents could choose to keep them home. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, what I just want you to just take away is that the supply of other seats versus being inside.
Thank you.
For elementary schools
Thank you.
is growing around the town.
Thank you.
We have a few new applications, a few new starts that we're expecting in 2024. I mentioned one of them. 3 parklands should start construction. Hopefully, there's a transfer there. The gentleman that was the lead of that project passed away last month. I think the property's transferring from one developer to another developer, so that might get started soon. But then again, that's also every 2025, 2026 completion. We're probably going to look at 2 other housing projects. 7 Sedgwick might come back, and then 2 Squab Lane, which is the White House behind. I still call it Brooks Brothers and Dunkin' Donuts. They're trying to put some housing back there. There are a number of other commercial properties in downtown that are for sale. We're keeping our eye on that. One that's very visible is the Wells Fargo building, the big sign on it says for sale. Some people have called about what they're going to do there. They have difficulties, all the ones downtown have difficulties with parking and whatnot. But those are things that we try to plan and zone for as they come along. Relative to Great Island, you said the closing was the 21st. Is there anything, if anything, P&Z needs to do anything in advance of that, please let us know. If we have to have any kind of special, whatever we need.
I think we're all set, but thank you to you guys and the EPC for kind of moving quickly and helping.
Yeah, I mean, with that said, I echo what John said with regards to try to getting Great Island open to the public for walking and whatnot sooner than possible. If anyone is speaking to that building committee, what I would suggest in certain aspects is doing stuff that I would call temporary. You don't need any P&Z approval for that. if you're going to put in a temporary sidewalk on the grass to the left to get people out of the street walking, you know, they did it over at the, you know, Darren High School track. They do it in all the parks where they put down wood chips and crushed stone and whatnot. It's not like you have to put down, you know, concrete and you know, a real sidewalk and then rip it up again in 3 years, but that's maybe a little bit way of getting over faster. And then the only other big thing that we have that's a carryover from 2024 is we have the discussion for accessory dwelling units in town, where most of the other towns in our peer group have already done something with that. We did a big study last year on it. We're still trying to refine that, so that's something to look out for in 2024 for us. And I think that's pretty much it. Any questions for me, Mo's here?
I just need to clarify something I said about early childhood, about kindergarten. The parents can send to area preschools, they can keep kids home. They actually can, there is a process, they can send a 4-year-old to school as long as they're 5 by January 1st. The state did put a provision for that, so just in case people are listening, if someone has a 4-year-old they want going to kindergarten, there is a process you can go through to enter that job.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Steve. Last but not least, Mr. Morton.
Well, we had a great State of the Town meeting on Monday night. The RTM is now organized. We go through a whole process after the elections. It isn't just all of a sudden, okay, let's go. We've got one meeting that gets all the district chairs and the members of the Rules Committee elected. And then the Rules Committee meets and assigns the entire membership of the RTM into standing committees. So that permits us to go ahead and do business. We don't like doing business on State of the Town. It goes long enough, but in this case, it was really important to get the circle done, and I'm really pleased with the way that went. I think there was a lot. We used a methodology of meeting with each one of the committees ahead of time and answering their questions in an environment where you could have frank discussion without disclosing critical items related to the negotiation. So I think that worked very, very well. Obviously, the questions were all answered. I stood up there and said, you know, it was a hush. They're like, well, we're ready to vote, you know. So that went very well. We have another vote coming up on the Board of Ethics. We're tied up in Robert's Rules of Order. In order to add a person onto the Board of Ethics, you have to have a majority. The RTM is split, a third, and nobody's getting a majority. So they will be voting again in January. In the meantime, there is a quorum in the Board of Ethics, and if they're required to act, they can act. I was watching the crowd as the presentations were made, and I didn't see anybody fading. And so you guys did great. You know, really, I think you were able to deliver the message and get the key points out without putting people, without people losing track of what was going on. And usually I can tell if I get complaints later, and I didn't have any. So.
Even the people you stick at the end of the meeting?
Yes. Well,
those weren't all that.
Well, no, but
I like where I was.
the end of the meeting is the test, you see. How good are you, you know?
That's right.
I think the recorded applause tracks helped too.
Yes, right. Exactly. Well, we added those this year too. No, we didn't. But,
Just leave out the laugh tracks and we'll be good. So.
right. So we're still, we are picking up on the budget. I'm sure the minions have been out talking to you. I understand they have, so that's good. Like to start the dialogue early. And so we'll continue with that. And we do have some business to do in January, but that's still a ways away and still sort of coming through the pipeline. So we think we will have a fire truck, and we also, we definitely will have a vote on the Board of Ethics. I think we'll just stay there until they make a decision. Could be a long night on January. Hello there. Anyway, so that's it on the RTM. We're off and running to a new year. Oh, I had I'm a member of the Bridgeport Regional Business Council, part of my business, and so that includes the Trumbull Chamber. So I go to a meeting early in the morning in Trumbull Chamber, sitting in this big building, and it turns out it's the CES building.
Oh, yes.
It's where CES is run from.
Yes.
Got to meet the gentleman who runs CES. I said, well, we don't have any kids, I don't think, from Darien up there. And he said, oh, yeah.
Sure we do.
Oh, yeah, we do.
Yeah.
I said, well, that's great. You're doing a great job. It's nice to meet you. Incredible facility. They handle everything from pre-K right up through 20s with educational programs up there. It's an amazing operation. But CES was always just sort of one of these places, you know. Well, I was sitting right in the headquarters.
Yeah.
So that's it.
Glad you got to see it.
Excellent. Any questions for Seth? Okay, I think if nothing else, again, I would just wish everybody a great Christmas holiday season, and hope everybody can spend time with family and friends and try to relax a little bit, and we will get geared up for the new year and see you in January. Any motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Steve?
Second.
Second. Okay, we stand adjourned. Thanks, everybody.